Boardroom Bound, episode 74.
That's one of the things that I really focus on and talk about is knowing your strengths. And part of that is you have to know who you are. So understanding your basic personality, and especially whether you're an introvert or an extrovert, is really going to be helpful in whatever role you choose.
Hello, and welcome to this episode of Boardroom Bound. My name is Alexander Lowry, and this is the podcast dedicated to intentional leadership in the boardroom. My goal is to give aspiring and existing directors the tips, tactics, and strategies necessary to transform your confidence and build a successful career as a board director. Quick reminder, you can get all of today's show notes at podcast.gordon.edu. And in today's show, we're speaking with Chelsey Brooke. She is a professional counselor and an expert on introverted versus extroverted personalities and how each of them can bring their best self to the workspace. And Chelsey will talk about on the show how she is a deeply introverted individual, clearly has a lot of knowledge, and she has practiced all of this and come up with best practices about how anyone can overcome that. And we will talk about the difference, for example, in networking if you're introverted versus extroverted. We have talked in this show so many times about networking is the key way you land a board role. How should you proceed that depending on which path you are, which personality you are, which areas are your strengths? And we will talk about that in depth today and have a lot of fun doing it. So let's jump into the show. Chelsey Brooke, welcome to the Boardroom Bound podcast.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me.
Well, delighted to have your expertise on the show today. You and I were talking ahead of time that I'm really excited to be able to tap into your specific skill set, and a couple parts of it will be relevant for us. We talk on this show a lot about networking, which for some people is a big and scary term, and not everybody's the same. People are unique. Some people are good, they're gregarious, they're social, they're extroverted, they're outgoing. They love that stuff. Other people, it would probably scare them to death. They want to sit in the corner. In a prior role, for example, I was a management consultant, and one of the partners, he loved it. You could drop him in a room of 5,000 people or 50 people, whatever. He would go talk to everyone. He loved it. But if you forced him to sit in the corner and make phone calls, cold calls to clients, he would cringe. And there were people on both sides of the spectrum, all different skill sets. I'm thrilled that we'll be able to talk about things like this today. But before we just dive into that, I'd love for you to set the scene, help people understand maybe how your career grew and developed and how you got to be where you are today.
Yeah, absolutely. Happy to share. So obviously, I am an introvert, so I'm going to be talking from introverted perspective. But something that I've found along the way is that even things that are helpful for introverts are also really helpful for extroverts. But we'll get into that in a minute. But growing up, I experienced so many of the challenges that are common to introverts: feeling out of place and awkward during social situations, didn't understand the anxiety that came from small talk or being in large groups. And I just got the feedback and advice so much to just get out of my shell or speak up and stop thinking so much. But I finally discovered that I wasn't any of the things that other people had said. I was simply an introvert. So being one of those typical overachiever kind of people, I started college at 16 and majored in psychology and sociology. So I really dove deep into the introverted temperament and learned the best ways to work with my unique personality type. And then I went on to graduate with a 4.0 in my graduate studies and earned a master's degree in counseling. So at that point, I began practicing as a professional counselor and really dove even deeper and honed my skills and knowledge in personal development, positive psychology, and specifically as it relates to introverts. And then I also started working with introverted women to help them uncover their true path and passion, and taught them those unique mindset strategies that they would need to embrace who they are and to create a career and lifestyle they truly love. So I noticed that I was working with so many amazing introverted women who hadn't yet fully realized what it means to be an introvert, which is such an important part of your career and life goals. And they definitely weren't aware of that before they found themselves in careers that really weren't in alignment with who they were. So there are so many unique parts about introverted women and why we're a unique group, because we're so often misunderstood and mislabeled and misguided on who we're supposed to be or what we should do. And that by the time it comes to pick a career, we're not picking it based on our strengths or a full understanding of who we are, but on the basis of the extroverted ideal that we've been encouraged to live up to our whole lives. So that is really kind of my background as far as why I have a personal love for and passion for this group and these types of women and working with introverted women. But as I've said, working with this group, all of the skills and the knowledge also applies to extroverts, and even in men and women in general. So that's just a little bit about me, and I'm sure we'll dive into some of the strategies later on as well.
Yeah, and let's start there. You talked about the extroverted ideal was the phrase I believe you used. And so if we think about a board member, historically this is someone who was a CEO, might be a retired CEO, maybe they were a CFO, could be a retired CFO, but it's basically that sort of larger than life, probably personality who's been running a big company. And we can all probably picture what some of these CEOs look like. We've seen them on the news. We've heard about them at annual meetings. Jamie Dimon, for example, where I was at JP Morgan, I'm pretty sure he had a eidetic memory. He could remember anything you'd ever said to him, and he loved talking to other people, and he knew everything. He read everything, and he could talk about everything. And you're thinking, well, is that what a CEO has to be? He was the best banker of our generation. So that is a very hard standard for anybody to live up to. But that's probably an example of a CEO. Some people might say the president of the country is a big-time CEO. Think about Barack Obama and how eloquent he was, that sort of thing. That's not a normal person. These are people that are sort of at the leading edge of like uber alpha males, or however you want to describe it. Like they are not typical, right? They are literally atypical. But let's just sort of break these terms down from an introverted to extroverted. And I'll give you my sense of it, and then you can tell us the reality of it. So Myers-Briggs may be a test that a lot of people have taken. And one of those dichotomies is E and I, introvert, extrovert, and there's a spectrum on there. And people say, are you an E or are you an I? And I think you're not asking about it correctly, because I might be just over the edge into the I, which means I can be an E, but if I were way down the I could be an E, but it'll really exhaust me. So help us really understand what this means, introverted versus extroverted.
Yeah, that's a great question, and a great point, too. It really is on a continuum. So someone can be, super extroverted, super introverted, or you can be even an ambivert, actually. I think came up with a term for people who are really in the middle. So one of the biggest things I think that's important to differentiate is that introversion and shyness are not the same thing. So while some introverts are shy, extroverts can also be shy too. That introversion and extroversion, it has to do with your temperament that you're born with, and shyness is a social anxiety that can affect any personality type. So I know a lot of times introverts are misrepresented as just being shy, and that's not the case. So I like to clarify that for sure. But the biggest difference between introverts and extroverts is really how we process and respond to information in different environments. So it's kind of like if you're having a conversation with an extrovert, then they're just kind of responding to the first thing that comes to their mind. They're not really necessarily overthinking it or being in their head about it. They're just really good about responding and being quick-witted in that way. An introvert, on the other hand, actually use a different, longer pathway in the brain. So they may hear something, or they're having a conversation, or they're processing their environment, and their brain begins to, think about possible answers they could give to a conversation, what the reaction might be. Other times they've been asked questions like that, and they start thinking about ways that they'd like to respond. They try to think of the right words, and then we get stuck, and that's where some of these misconceptions and mislabels come about introverts, because at this point it's been far too long in the conversation, and people begin to wonder if you're okay and why you haven't responded yet. So that's the one difference. And then the other difference is that introverts are just drained by interacting with other people, or even being in busy environments, but even when they're enjoying themselves. So you could be around friends, family, doing things that you love, but your social batteries are just drained by being around other people or being in busy environments. Whereas, like you were talking about earlier, extroverts become more excited and pumped up from being around other people, and they get drained when they're alone. So those kind of the basic differences between introverts and extroverts, and certainly there are more differences and traits that we could dive into as well there.
And I like the way you described it, and maybe the easiest way for people to imagine is the person who's an introvert has a battery, and the battery will get drained down. You got to plug it in after a certain amount of time. The extrovert is more like a solar panel. And if you put them out there with a lot of other people, they're taking that energy in and it's filling them back up. And it's just understanding yourself. So, for example, I am probably about maybe halfway down the I scale. And so if I am doing extrovert out meeting people all day long and having those conversations, I really enjoy it and I love it. But if I do it all day long without a break, I'm probably at home at night, sitting in the dark, just doing stuff on my own in my own head. And my wife's going, "What happened to you today?" I'm like, "Oh, I had to talk all day long." She goes, "All right, I'll get it. I'll leave you alone for half an hour." And I guess the first part here is, Chelsey, people need to understand themselves in order to be successful. What do they need to get through it, right? So if you are a deeply introverted and you want to be in a board role, you're going to know that you are going to be with a full day of intense conversations and having a deep dive discussion. So you need to prepare yourself before and after that, right? Help someone think through what that would look and feel like.
Yes, that's a great point. So that's one of the things that I really focus on and talk about is knowing your strengths. And part of that is you have to know who you are. So understanding, your basic personality, and especially whether you're an introvert or an extrovert, is really going to be helpful in whatever role you choose. And I really encourage introverts, especially since most work environments and board roles and things like that tend to be more geared toward extroverts, or would at least seem to be. But introverts have a lot of strengths that they can bring to that kind of role or leadership positions, and they just have to know what those are. So like you were talking about, really own your schedule as much as possible. Even if you have meetings scheduled, then plan breaks in between, or take your lunch break on your own, or go outside and go for a 10-minute walk, or anything that you can do to kind of break up the day that recharges your own batteries. Introverts are also great at listening, and that's another huge important role if you're in a board role or even in a leadership position. These are all really important strengths to consider, and not feel like that you don't have as much to offer, or to dismiss that about yourself. Introverts are great at reflecting, they're great at observing, and really getting people together because they want to listen, and they're comfortable in that role. They're comfortable asking questions of people and getting information, and then they're really good at sitting down and being able to organize that, and they're not afraid to have that solitude and alone time to organize their thoughts and organize other people's ideas and information.
When I think about a boardroom, the ideal board role is diversity, and many people for that's males versus females. Gender is easy to see, or perhaps skin color. But diversity of thought to me is so many other things. You need a few people that think out loud and talk out loud, because that can generate discussion. But if everybody was like that, you would never get through any topics on the agenda, because it would go, I liken it to a baseball game. You only get to bat 3 or 4 times in a game. Mm-hmm. That's how many times you get to talk during a board meeting, because there's so many smart people that need to share their thoughts. Introverts can be really helpful in that way, because they're often processing inside, and when they come out, it's an insightful comment that they're sharing. Help people imagine what that looks and feel like in their own work environment, and perhaps how they see that in themselves and see it in others, because they could be taking this and working on it immediately, thinking, well, how do I better empower people that are a different personality type than mine? Right.
Yeah, I work a lot with introverts on how to advocate for themselves authentically in the workplace. And the first step to advocating for yourself authentically as an introvert is to really get rid of everything that you think of what it means to advocate for yourself, because we often just think of just getting out there and being bold and telling your opinion and kind of being like an extrovert, basically, and that's never going to be authentic for an introvert. So an introvert is advocating for yourself is really, first of all, about understanding yourself and knowing what your strengths are, what your needs are, and then just educating other people on those strengths and preferences, which you do naturally by understanding yourself and being okay with that. So, for example, if you have a group meeting or something like that, a lot of introverts may have anxiety, or they're not sure when to, say a comment or make a comment in the group meeting. So I always encourage my introverted clients to go in with comments that you want to make or questions that you want to make, and try to do that toward the beginning of the meeting, so that you're not sitting there the whole time trying to figure out when the best time is to, put your comment in. So try to do it in the beginning of the meeting. Or, take notes throughout the meeting and then send a follow-up email to the leaders of the group. And that really makes you stand out as well, because you can see that you were listening and taking notes and paying attention. You have time to organize your thoughts after that point. And then you really stand out, because you may be the only person who's sending a follow-up email that's explaining, the notes and your thoughts and the process, and gives them another chance to see you and see that you really are participating, but you just do it through observation. So we really receive so many messages about how being a team player and having all this energy and sharing your thoughts spontaneously during group meetings is the right way to be, but it's actually completely counterproductive and counterintuitive for most introverted personality types. But once you understand why those methods don't work, then you're much more likely to feel prepared and justified to explain those differences to others and to do what works for you. A lot of times for introverts, having a plan and being prepared feels much more authentic than being spontaneous. Whereas extroverts, may not plan much. They kind of just go in, say what comes to mind. They don't have anxiety or concerns about, forgetting what to say or not having anything to say, like an introvert may feel, because a lot of times as an introvert, we can kind of get to a point where we don't know what to say, or our minds go blank, and we're just so scared of that. So being prepared and having comments and thoughts you want to say beforehand, and having that option to follow up with written communication can give you such a strength and make you stand out as well in a positive way.
I like this as advice, and clearly a big part of today is knowing yourself and the strengths that you bring and how best to do that. And I think what you're saying resonates with me because I'm a reflective personality, which means a couple things. I love your guidance that someone could go away, digest the information after the meeting, and follow up in a channel that's appropriate for them and allows them to shine. And another part of it for me is if I'm going into a board meeting, I've got 1,000 pages of information I have to read, which is not atypical. I can do that and think about that ahead of time, write my thoughts out, and I will have processed a lot of that before I get into the meeting. And as the meeting goes on, of course, the conversation will move in different directions. But because all that pre-thinking has been done in that preparation, you are ready to adjust as the meeting goes on, as opposed to someone, if they're a reflective personality, a deep thinker, highly introverted, who wasn't prepared, probably really on the back foot and not setting themselves up for success, right?
Right. Yep, exactly. So it's just about knowing your strengths and working with that instead of feeling like you need to become someone else.
And let's think about this networking. Let's take this now that we've opened up the topic and really expanded out there, because we know the vast majority of board seats are filled. Depending on statistics, you think about maybe up to 2/3 of positions are filled by personal network. So if you are someone who is introverted, you may have spent most of your career not being out at, say, the bar for a company outing or going out to different events with people and being social, which can be a big part of networking. If that's your personality and that's what you're struggling with, Chelsey, how do you help people work that through to make sure they are building the network that they will need?
Yeah, this is definitely, or can be definitely a big struggle for introverts. And like you said, networking is so important if you're wanting to grow your connections, move up in a company, or even secure a boardroom position. And like you said, depending on your personality, this could sound so fun and exciting, or as an introvert, really one of the last things that you want to do. So even though I specialize in working with introverts, I've also worked with extroverts in different capacities. And what I've found is that having a process for the way you approach networking is more important than depending on your personality alone. So even though extroverts may be more comfortable with the idea of networking, and they may be used to just, going there, having conversations, seeing where it goes, having a plan and a process is actually going to be more successful over time. So I break this down into 3 specific tips and strategies. So number 1 is to have a goal. Know what you want to walk away from the networking event with. Are you trying to make connections for a project, meet higher ups to get promoted, seek a specific position in a certain company? Know what you want and what you're looking for and who you need to talk to, and then what success would look like to you at the end of the event. And number 2, going with that, is prepare beforehand what you're going to say. So once you know your goal, you'll have a better understanding of what you need to say about who you are, what you do, as well as how to steer the conversation. So have in mind ways you can link what you do with what you really want to be talking about. And 3 is just to be curious. Ask questions and be interested in other people. For the most part, people want to talk about themselves, and they're a lot more likely to remember the person who seems genuinely interested in them versus someone who seems to only want to talk about themselves. So having a goal, preparing what you want to say, and then just being curious and genuine and asking questions can really give you a direction for what you need to get to in the networking event, and then you'll be able to know, what success is going to look like to you at the end of the event, and especially for introverts going in and having a plan, knowing what you want to walk away with, what you want to say, and how you want to steer the conversation. It's going to make you so much more confident going in, and then you'll be able to know how to adjust that and just see it as a process that needs to be fine-tuned instead of just relying on yourself and being unsure sometimes of where you want to go. If you go in with a plan, it's going to go so much more easily, and you're going to feel so much more authentic while you're there as well.
And I think those are easily actionable advice and steps that people can take. And I absolutely agree. People generally like talking about themselves, whether they're excited about their kids or what they're going on at work or a sporting activity. It's very easy to get the ball rolling that way. And it doesn't feel as intimidating, right? And you
Right.
learn a lot about someone and perhaps have a sense for where your affinities are and work together with them. But if someone has, maybe never done this before, they're deeply introverted, but they're thinking, I know the skill sets I bring, I know the value I bring to a business, but I need people to see that and understand it in different ways. You gave us a couple of ideas already, say like the follow-up email for a meeting. What other thoughts do you have, Chelsey?
Yeah, definitely. So at work, I think one of the things that we don't always emphasize enough is the importance of nonverbal communication. As an introvert, you have to be aware of where you give out your energy levels. So you may want to save your energy for more one-on-one meetings and things like that, and be able to use nonverbal communication to other things. So facial expressions, hand gestures, nodding, leaning forward, all of those are ways to express yourself and kind of conserve your verbal communication for more important conversations. And then just having a pleasant look when approaching other people. Using email, as I said, not only to send notes after the meeting, but also to send notes of appreciation or encouragement, or to say something that you forgot to add at a meeting. And remember to put your name on anything that you create, produce, or help with. I know as introverts we can be especially bad about this because we never want to appear like we're being arrogant, or we may just dismiss some of the things that we're doing that we don't think are that important. But remember to put your name on anything that you have anything to do with and that you're helping with. And then preparing what you want to say as much as possible before a meeting so that you feel so much more authentic. The anxiety levels go down so you don't worry about what to say, because that's a lot of what introverts get stuck on, is they really get concerned with going somewhere and then not knowing what to say. So if you're preparing beforehand, then you're going to be so much more confident and you're more genuine. You're bringing out the more authentic side of you the more that you are prepared and you're not worrying about what to say and things like that.
Well, Chelsey, clearly an opportunity is for, you were talking about introverts, for example, is reading and studying and becoming aware and prepared going into something. And you and I were talking before the show about a book that you love and that you recommend for people. And I love the title, about what you need to lead but won't learn in business school, right?
Mm-hmm.
By Selena Rezvani. Can you tell us more about that and why you think that's such a great book for our audience?
Yeah, that was definitely a great read, because as women, there are so many things and there are so many different things that we have to know going into business that you're just not necessarily going to be taught. And one of those things I think is really important is remembering to bring in your feminine characteristics and your feminine traits to the workplace and not feeling like you have to leave those out. So even if you are working toward getting a boardroom position or even just getting a leadership position, don't be afraid to bring your feminine qualities into work with you. Being sensitive and nurturing and compassionate, understanding, flexible. Women tend to be really good at cultivating relationships and making sure that people feel supported and understood. And those are such important roles and things that you need in a team to really build that morale and are going to allow you to seek higher positions. So definitely don't feel like that you have to just, bring in a masculine side or just bring in this bold, direct personality. You can also, accompany that with being having good communication and being compassionate and understanding and sensitive as well.
Well, Chelsey, we appreciate all that guidance you've given us today. Wonderful insights. And for some of our audience who might be thinking, how can they follow you? How can they contact you? What would you recommend?
Yeah, definitely. So I'm offering a free training series right now for anybody who really wants to figure out what they want to do, what their passion would look like, and learn how to develop that self-belief and what we've been talking about, especially if you're an introvert, and then learning how to create that success mindset. So people can get that at thepathfinderforyou.com/free, and then, of course, you can find me on any social media as well.
Well, Chelsey, we were so grateful to have you on the Boardroom Bound podcast today. Thank you for sharing your insights and helping all of our audience to work towards being more boardroom bound.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you so much for having me.
That's it for this episode of Boardroom Bound. I really enjoyed chatting with Chelsey Brooke. We talk so much on the show about networking and how that's essential, but we often haven't given you the tools to bring your best self to that activity. And I love that we took a deep dive today in introverted versus extroverted. Everybody falls somewhere on that spectrum. It might be right in the middle. It might be part of the way down that. It might be entirely down one side versus the other. How you can be successful doing that. Some actionable advice that you can take away from this. Now remember, if you head over to podcast.gordon.edu, you can get links to all of the resources we talked about today. And please know that the Boardroom Bound team and I are just so proud to be your go-to podcast for all things that connect, prepare, and empower you to land a board seat. Be sure to subscribe to this podcast so you don't miss any of the high-quality content we're bringing to you every Wednesday. Now, thanks for joining me today. I can't wait to share more stories and strategies from brilliant business minds with you again next week. Remember to keep tuning in to be Boardroom Bound.